a couple of years ago, we started a youth program just to get kids engaged in that side of things, right? And it's amazing the experiences that these kids have. Um, you know, whether it's a 1 day, whether it's a 3 day, or whether it's a week long trip back into the Frank Church wilderness, right? They all have different perspectives. Boom,
Tim,
good.
there you go. How are you, sir?
I am very good.
Good. Thank you for coming. So you're the executive director of the trails.
So what I am actually, Melanie Vining is our
Yes.
executive director. I actually chair the board of Idaho Trails Association.
wonderful.
As it is a nonprofit, right?
Yes.
So we have an 9-member board that really drives the organization, the business, and kind of sets the vision of where we're going and where we're chasing. So yeah, I lead that and have done that for about the last 5 years.
What got you into that? Because I mean, obviously, as a board member, when you're selecting board members or trying to get board members, if you need to replace somebody, you need somebody who's deeply ingrained in the topic, right? Like they very much feel it. They have something to contribute, and that's something, like being a board member is a thankless job. So it's just all obligation and no benefit.
It's an interesting, that's an interesting perspective and interesting twist, right? I totally agree with you. Got to find somebody that, especially young nonprofits, they need people with passion.
Right.
Now, I don't think, you need specific expertise. And that's a lot of times what happens. A lot of times nonprofits get started, and not to get off on the nonprofit side of things, but nonprofit gets started by somebody that's very passionate about something, right?
Sure.
But they may not know how to run a business, or they may not know how to manage employees. They may not know the intricate things that they need. And it's amazing how, as you kind of create a diverse board, where all the talent comes in, and not all of it is focused for us on the trails, right? And that's that's a piece of it that when we think of boards and nonprofit boards, it's not always the skill of what is the nonprofit doing that you really need, right? A lot of times it's, hey, what do you bring to the table? Right. And you're passionate about it, and let's go, right? Yeah, right. And you bring something that somebody else doesn't, that brings the diversity in there and the diversity of thought, and really drives the success, I think, of a very successful nonprofit in that context. So
yeah. I mean, but that's the old story of the pie shop, right? Which is like the owner of the pie shop started the pie shop because she was really good at making pies. But actually having a pie shop and running a pie shop included all of these other things that she had no interest in.
Exactly right.
She didn't learn the other skill sets, and then all of a sudden she has no employees because they quit because she didn't have connections with them. I mean, that's that classic entrepreneurial book, The E-Myth. Yeah. So what do the trails do? Because the one thing that I'm really realizing is, and again, like a lot of people, I moved here without knowing a lot about the area. I knew that I had a great need to leave the place I was in. I knew some about this area. I knew the fundamentals about the self-determination and independence and being able to raise my family in a safe manner, right? These were some of the core reasons why we moved here, and we knew a couple people. Right. But I had no idea that this was like the hub for some of the most amazing outdoor recreation like in the world. And I mean, embarrassing to say that, fine, but it's true. And in talking to, for instance, Larry Callister and a couple other people, it's like, oh my gosh, like we have some of the most incredible things at our fingertips. And I know, at least from talking to other people that have moved here similarly, they have no idea either. So what does trails do?
Yeah. So when we think about trails, especially within Idaho, right, it's not what are the trails for? What do they do, right? Go back in history. If you look at Nez Perce history and you take, the Native Americans that were within the lands here, it was a mode of transportation for them. And there's some of those trails that are still today valid within the state of Idaho, right? So it started there as a source of transportation, right? There's an aspect of trails that is also used as a source of revenue business. So you've got your backcountry hunters, you've got guides, you've got, a multitude of different entities like that are also using these trails. You've got the huge piece of it, and probably the more prevalent is the recreation piece of it, right? And that recreation can be motorized or non-motorized when we think of the state of Idaho, right? A lot of people are passionate about, the backpacking, hiking side of things. A lot of people are very passionate about, the ATV, UTV side of things. And, so that's really, when we think about trails, those are really the things that really drive that need, right? Now, a lot of times the land managers are not focused on any particular sort of that entity, right? if you were to talk with a lot of the different guides and the folks that provide a service for a price out there, they would tell you the land managers are really not taking care of the resource in which they're intended to utilize, right? So it's where was I going with that, right? It's kind of one of those where there is a little bit of a disconnect, and I think that's one of the reasons why ITA specifically got started, is just how do we bring everyone into the resource and have some ownership in the resource, right? And it's individuals that, at the end of the day are going to make it successful, because, it's those that are passionate about it. As we mentioned, there are those that are willing to go out there and give back. And when they do that as well, there's a political aspect that comes to it, is they're willing to, be a voice. Right. And it's not so much get into all the political aspects of trails and that side of things, but people are willing to, if they're invested in it, be a voice in it. Right. So
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. Right. And the maintenance, one of the incredible, I spoke with this guy a while back, and he was telling me when he moved here in the mid-90s, I believe, and he moved to Eagle, and he said Eagle had, it was like once a year they had a paint the town day. And he said people would come down, and it's insane to me to think that, you would have a bunch of independent or private business owners and property owners that are like, yeah, paint the town, great, just slap it on. But people would come down with paint, and people would volunteer, and they would maintain the downtown area. They would maintain these classic buildings and things that they enjoyed. And it was this whole coming together. And that obviously benefited everybody, because properties looked better and, everybody enjoyed the quaint downtown. But there's an aspect of like, we all benefit if some of us volunteer to improve or maintain these things that we all have access to and we all rely on. And I think I'll speak for my former state. I know as people got busier, right? You have an incredible frequency of 2 working households. You have people that are just kind of barely scraping by with the cost of living. You don't have a lot of time to volunteer and maintain public spaces. And not only that, you have very little time to even use public spaces, right? Like people just don't have, even if you physically have access to it, it's like, I don't have the headspace or the time, the physical time, mental energy to go, hiking up the mountain, go to Mount Diablo. And again, that leads to a great fall off of not just participation, but also maintenance. And then everything falls into disrepair. And that resource that you once have now no longer exists because nobody used it, nobody maintained it, and now it's gone.
Exactly. There was no invested interest in it. Right. And the whole volunteering, just people giving their time is a unique culture, I guess I would say. And, that's one thing I would say within the state of Idaho, whether it's their neighbor, whether it's an organization, people are really willing to give their time, right? And I think now you're even seeing in the corporate world of things where it's embraced even in that side of things where, hey, get out, embrace your community, engage with the community, volunteer, give your time, give your money, help around, right? And that's even, a lot within the state of Idaho, right? So yeah, when it comes to the trail maintenance, it's, it's not for every volunteer, but, I'll tell you, we have a spectrum of, from youth clear through to, older retired individuals. And we get the whole spectrum of individuals out on the trails to do trail maintenance. Right. So as we say, there's always something for someone. Sometimes it takes, it does definitely takes the team. And as we kind of walk through things and do trails and, there's always that little piece that someone can do, right? So,
I have 3 boys, and they're quite wild. I mean, they're high energy like me. They're gigantic. They're awesome. We're actually clocking in at something like pretty much every day. We're ripping through 18 eggs just for breakfast.
Perfect.
And that's just the egg part. Right. That's not like a pancake or a French so they're huge, high energy, and I have a very dear friend, Jess D'Angelo, and she has a consulting kind of practice that she integrates hiking and trails with her consulting clients to help them engage their brains in different ways and really explore things. And it's one of those things where you're like, that sounds crazy, but at the same time you realize like, oh, of course, of course. I had a client years ago, about 20 years ago. And this guy was way up in tech world and had this firm that he owned with his partner. He said, whenever we have problems, we need park time. And I was like, I was like 25. I was like, what do you mean, man? And he's like, well, listen, here's the thing. When you're staring at a problem and you just cannot resolve it and you can't, he's like, what you need to do is put down your phone, put down your computer, put down everything and go walk through a park for like an hour and think about nothing. Don't engage, don't consume, let your brain rest. And he's like, and almost without fail, when about 20 minutes of not intending to solve the problem, you solve the problem. And so she utilizes trail systems and hikes intentionally to harness that creative, non-consumptive, outside of your element process to help people arrive at different different ideas. I heard this. I'm like, that's crazy, but like maybe. And so I
just getting out in nature itself, right? It detaches you from, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, and does. Not only,
and by the way, I did it with her. It totally worked.
Yeah,
it totally worked. And I started taking my boys on hikes. And again, this is where I'm sorry, I go off on tangents.
No, that's okay.
But my boys, the second we got them out on a trail, and this was just a local trail, 10 minutes away, all of a sudden, my 10-year-old's like, I feel so alive. I'm like, we're literally just walking through, like, he's like, this is incredible. And he starts running. I'm like, what is he doing? Like, where is he going? And there was something just visceral for him about being outside, having a trail to walk on, a little creek to the right, little hill to the left. And they blossomed, man.
Yeah. And especially youth like that. Right. And that's one of the things that, we, a couple of years ago, we started a youth program just to get kids engaged in that side of things. Right. And it's amazing the experiences that these kids have, whether it's a 1 day, whether it's a 3 day, or whether it's a week-long trip back into the Frank Church wilderness, right? They all have different perspectives, but it really is one of the best things that there is for you can do for kids is get them out, get them in an environment that, they can not be worried about everything else around them that is coming at them at 1,000,000 miles an hour. They can just kind of sit and listen sometimes, or look around and see things that within nature. I mean, as you can only imagine, there's things that are just amazing, right? If you take a good deep look at, oh, wow, this ecosystem and that, right? It's interesting. And again, we've developed that program for kids. I think this year we did 6 trips that were youth-only trips, and I think there were roughly 35, 40 kids that got to participate in that. And again, some of them were week-long. And again, talk about your boys, get them in.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, and I want to go too.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
We saw a family in California. We go down and visit them, obviously. And you can get blue belly lizards down there. Like, they're everywhere. And you just reach down. They're lazy as hell too. You can just reach down and pick them up. I never realized how lazy they were. And so one of our recent trips, one of my sons got really into it. Catching lizards like crazy. We're going and like hunting for them, all of these things. We come back and he says, well, let's go find lizards. I'm like, I know there have to be lizards. I mean, we're in a desert, but like, I don't know where they are because I don't see them around the neighborhood. Get a hold of Charlie Justice, who used to work for Idaho Fish and Game. He's a reptologist. And I was like, hey, snakes and stuff. Where are the lizards? He's like, all right, go to Murphy, Rabbit Creek Road, 3rd Cattle Guard on the left, like park, the trail's on the right. And so I do. My son wakes me up at like 6 a.m. on a Sunday.
Off we
Get
go.
in the car. Yeah, off we go. So we drive an hour, find Rabbit Creek Road, amazingly, 3rd Cattle Guard, park on the left. And there's this trail right on the right. And it's like, just out of nowhere in the middle of the desert. And it's already getting hot. But I'm like, I guess here we go. So we got like sticks and gloves and stuff. And there were these lizards and snakes. We ran around the same, it had to be like 400 square yards for like the next several hours, chasing lizards covered in like that really fine kind of dusty earth. And like, we never caught any of the lizards, because let me tell you, lizards in Idaho do not mess around. Like, these guys moved so fast. Yeah. Like, I didn't know lizards could move that fast. And like, we found a ribbon snake. It's like all of these things. And again, the engagement he got just by having access, just marginally off the road on this trail, just walked down like 100 yards. And then we started hunting, and it was like, this is incredible.
Right. And that's just a great example of creating that access, keeping these trails open, doing the things that are needed so that, anyone can go use it. Right. And it's that's a story of a very short trail. But if you think of these that are going, hundreds of miles or, tens of miles back into the wilderness areas, how much that opens up as well. Just whether it's kids' imagination or just opens up to the things that you can see and explore.
Right. It's wild times.
Yeah.
Like it actually, it's funny you'd say wild times. Like it is attempting to get kids back into like, go, like you're walking into the desert on this trail. And by the way, don't walk off the trail because there are these big thorns and some other things. But there's a problem, at least locally, that I hear people talk about where certain land, like BLM land, has been annexed into certain cities and stuff, and there are trail systems involved there. For instance, there's a large trail system that's going to continue to be developed in the Eagle area, and Eagle's shaped very oddly, right? With a big patch that hasn't been annexed in, but people don't maintain that well, right? It's utilized very aggressively by, say teens, people that go up on a trail and like burn pallets and, throw parties. I took my boys up there recently and all kinds of, people, all kinds of bullet casings and it's fine, whatever. But then like you could tell people are like partying beer cans and all this stuff. How is that? Who's responsible for those types of maintenance projects? That's not clearing a down tree or, trying to cut back brush. That's, hey, there's some agency likely that should be in charge of junk removal or kind of stewardship of this land.
Yeah, and that's a good question on the Eagle end of things, right? Let's use Boise as an example. Sure. I think they've got probably the best model that there is when we think of the Boise foothills and the trails within the Boise foothills, right? So the Ridge to Rivers organization, they do a phenomenal job maintaining and taking care of the trails, all again, not 100% volunteer based. They do have a couple individuals that are there, full time, but they also, and we work and partner with them very closely on a lot of different little projects. Say, we're going to go remove barbed wire. We're going to go, look and help just maintain a trail. So we do a little work with them as an organization. When you talk about Eagle, right, it really comes back to the land managers and the importance of the land managers. That urban interface is definitely a unique situation, I think, because there's a lot of times that it gets overused versus what the rest of the resource that the land managers manage it, and they don't know how to prioritize that, right? So I think a lot of times in the types of areas that you're talking about that are not actively managed by a specific entity for that specific trail, they do become a little bit not so much neglected, but not getting the attention that they need, right? And some of the times the attention that they're getting is not a positive attention because the utilization is so overused because of that closeness to that, right? So the folks at Ridge to Rivers, again, that is a great example of, having the vision of what to do with a resource that has become a very key resource to the city of Boise, right? Is all of that mountain biking, all of that hiking, and you get up a little higher, even into the motorcycle and the, and that side of it, right? They've really done a great job of having a vision, not only to acquire some of it and, have it as public land, but the city of Boise public land, but also, really setting a growth and a way and a resource to maintain, right? So,
gotcha.
It's, these urban interface areas are an interesting one of where when you say, who's going to do that, who's going to maintain it, because most of the time they're overused, right? Based on the land manager's ability to actually maintain some of these closer trails, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to clean up the area that we went, which is, in Eagle, like you're going to have to go up there with a huge team. You're going to have giant bags and, maybe there's like an adopt a trail program where
exactly, or Eagle does something like Boise did, right? And hey, there's an entity that, okay, we're going to develop this resource as a piece of our community.
Right.
And not just something that is laying out there that from time to time we may go look at or may pay attention to it, right? So actively take a role. But
besides the urban rural interface where you have this real overutilization of a very small amount of area and resource with trails, are there other challenges that maintaining the trail systems or the trail systems have experienced with the exceptional growth that Idaho has experienced? Because obviously, like, that's the number one thing everybody talks about. Like, oh, so many people here. Like, oh, it's so much. Like, everybody has a hard time understanding why they're, how to manage like the Boise River, right? It's like it just gets, log jammed.
Right. And, that definitely, I think when I think about it and talk about it a little bit, it's not so much the growth. Obviously, no matter where you're at, whether it's in Idaho, whether it's in Washington, California, pick any state, there's going to be people coming in that, are coming from other areas. Migration across the United States is a common thing. One of the things that I would say has put the most pressure on certain areas is your social media, your Instagram, your Facebooks, and people wanting to put that magic picture out there or grab that, right?
Selfie.
So exactly, right? That's put a lot of pressure in specific areas. We'll take the sawtooth as an example, right? I mean, it's become very popular. Everyone knows, and it gets a lot of pressure. Right. So, one of the things we always talk about is one, how can we get people out of the sawtooth, right? How can we open trails and open areas and make people aware of, there are other very beautiful areas within the state of Idaho. We all just don't have to be in the sawtooth following each other around and that side of things. Right. But yeah, when you talk about growth is an aspect of it. But to tell you the truth, I think, the Instagram, that side of things is really what pushes people to certain areas that, may have some uniqueness, right? And may have some beauty that, is what they believe is exceptional and they're wanting to share with everybody and trying to see, can we get more clicks on this, right? So
let me ask you something. I'm really curious about social media. It is one of those things that it's this incredible communication mechanism that we've never experienced before. And it's like 2 decades old. Like, we don't know what to do with it. And it's interesting that you point this out, because it's almost like, okay, social media, like you're saying, Instagram, everybody wants to go where this beautiful picture was taken.
Or this hot springs.
Or the hot springs. That's right. Yeah, the hot springs. And it's funny, I actually not worked with, but I had a really good friend in college that was really into a smattering of outdoors things. She at one point went off into the wilderness for like 60 days with a giant backpack and was really into these types of things, and ended up doing a thesis paper about, I believe it was Kilimanjaro. And she's like, you have this lifelong goal to like climb Kilimanjaro, and you go and you plan, you do all these things, and day of you're going to summit and it's great. And you get in line behind the other 3,000 other people doing it. Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
And how do we manage these global resources, and how do these countries take the burden of everybody wanting to go there? Right. And this was back in like 2003 when she was saying this, 2004. Yeah. But it's almost like, so let's make the gross assumption that Instagram drove people to the sawtooth to very specific scenic spots. And you're saying, hey, how do we educate people about other areas? And it's funny because I think social media is the problem, but it also may be the solution, because the idea is like, okay, here are these other places. And how do you communicate that to the populace in a manner like you can put trails on a website? That's not the same as seeing somebody taking a picture in this other spot, right?
Right, exactly. And again, that's one of the things that we kind of backed up and said, okay, well, first of all, you have to make it accessible.
Right.
Right. And if the trails are not maintained, if they're not where people can access it, no matter how much you drive and push to get people certain areas in certain places, they're not going to go, right? They got to make it accessible, right? And I think, we take the Seven Devils, the Gospel Hump Wilderness area. There are a lot of different wilderness areas outside of the Sawtooth that, again, don't get the traffic, don't get the pressure, right? But a lot of those resources have not been maintained in some of those areas as well either, right? So we do a lot of focus in those areas and a lot of work in those areas to try to help with that, right? Again, working very closely with the land managers and trying to figure out from their strategic perspective what they're trying to achieve and how can we help that, as well as making sure that, we give some direction and share, here, look at this area, think of this area, or introduce people, take the volunteers, right? If you take a volunteer into an area and where they're helping you maintain a trail, and then the next thing they know, they understand the beauty of it, they see the beauty of it, they're going to go back, they're going to return, right? They're going to tell friends, they're going to tell that, right? So, and that's the hope, because we're always going to have this certain level of growth. And somehow we have to kind of spread that out, and recreation is going to be a key piece of what everyone wants to do in the state of Idaho. That's why people come here, is to recreate in the outdoors. And
do you think people, a broader question, again, I've obviously have not lived here that long, so you would know much more about the growth. I mean, I think there used to be a wave of people, a good friend of mine, Burke Mantell, he's great. He he came on, he actually introduced wild turkeys or like reintroduced wild turkeys. Cause I guess when he moved here in the early 80s, there was something like 40 turkeys.
Yeah,
there was nothing,
many
right?
at all.
And
No.
he was integral in actually introducing turkeys and then developing a turkey hunting season in Idaho. So like he goes way back with fish and game. And he moved here in the 80s with the intent of just being like another hunterman and fisherman and awesome. And this is what he describes. He's like, I didn't have kids, just want to come here, do my work and hunt and fish like crazy. That was 40 years ago. People are moving here now, like me, for reasons completely independent of turkey hunting season, right? Like Idaho is now attracting people that are not here for those reasons. They could be here for medical freedoms. They could be here for schools. They could be here for, employment, cost of living, family, all of these different things. So what I'm saying is that the population is growing, but I would have to imagine the frequency of people moving here specifically for these outdoor resources, probably not that prevalent. The thing that's driving up the population in those locations is probably popularity from outside the state. Yeah. People traveling here to see the sawtooths that don't actually live here. So it's kind of like the population growth in Idaho is decoupled from the problem of swelling, attractions.
Right. And you get those, you get the population that come and then, let's start to go explore, right? And then they do kind of reach out. May not have been the reason that they came here, but a lot of times they see that resource and they hear about that resource and they're like, wait a minute, I need to go explore this and see this and that. And then it opens up a whole new window for them as well, right?
Yeah.
So, because it's so easy here to be able to engage in that outdoor aspect of things, right? Whether it's the sawtooth, pick whether it's rivers, whether it's mountains, whether it's deserts, right? We've got all aspects of it here, and you got all 4 seasons you can play in those. So,
yeah, man, it is wild, and the amount of energy that really goes into creating a higher quality of life for people here, it blows my mind. Like I grew up in a place where people were compelled to move there for finance, right? Like it was an economic hub, or I was born there, right? And so I just existed there. But now realizing it's like, the reason people didn't maintain cities and parks and things is because they didn't have the burden of trying to convince people to move there. People were moving there for reasons other than that. And so they're just like, whatever, it's not even a priority. We'll just jack up the prices of houses. Anyway, you guys had an immersion program this year.
Exactly.
And that was, and again, you can give me the details, but it was roughly a few-week program where people were wholly immersed in the trail system and then essentially the outdoors. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you the start of it, right? It was one of those, we were sitting down in a strategic session and we have on our board a couple individuals that are, very passionate through hikers, very passionate mountaineers, those that have been in wilderness areas and in areas where they've seen the benefits of detaching for a long period of time, right? And detaching from not just your day-to-day routine, but detaching from all the things that, take your mind away from just being focused, right? So the idea was thrown out, hey, let's look at, can we do an immersion program? Can we do something where we do a trail trip that is an extended trail trip where people, can be out there and completely detach from society around it, right? As I mentioned before, one of the things that's beautiful about the state of Idaho is we have this wilderness area, the Frank Church, right? That's 700 and some million acres, and we utilizing that as an opportunity, right? We're also utilizing the Idaho Centennial Trail as an opportunity to get people out. And our immersion program right now is a 3-week program. This is the second year that we've done it. And we're really, again, a lot of times focused into the Frank Church area where we'll send a team of 6 to 8, and they're very, they're vetted, they're not hand selected, but there's a process that you have to apply. We go through an interview process because if you have somebody out there for 3 weeks, you want to make sure that, one, they're fully invested in it, and 2, capable mentally, physically, go right on down the line, right? And if there are things that you need to learn and teach prior to going on this trip, that we can help cover those, right? Do they have the right equipment? Do they have the right training? Do they have what they need, right? So we've got some very, talented, experienced leaders that we send on these trips. And then they spend 3 weeks in the wilderness area. The last 2 years, it's been the Frank Church. They spend about 3 weeks out there. Resupplied a couple of times within that 3 weeks. So whether it's resupplied by airplane or resupplied by a pack string, each week they don't have to carry their whole 3 weeks worth of food. Each week someone will come in and resupply them with food, with whatever they need. We've always got, our spots, things that we can communicate out. If there's something that somebody needed specifically and can be sipped in on those, right? So you're not completely out there on your own. You do have some attachment, but it definitely gives people an opportunity to not only, experience the wilderness area for an extended period of time, but also become quite the tight-knit group, and where you're relying on each other, working with each other day to day. And again, it's, the individuals that have done it just rave about the experience. It's one of those, I want to go myself.
I'm dying to go on it right now.
Exactly. It's, and it's a great thing. The last couple of years as well, there's been challenges, it's never goes perfect. And that's also part of
real, that's the wildlife.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, it's never perfect for the elk. Right. Like, it's never perfect for the coyote. Like, it's never, like, if you leave the security of the studio with the HVAC system, like, it's never going to be perfect.
If you become part of that ecosystem, which you are, you become, some of the challenges that everything, that you have out there. But, that immersion program's been a great thing. And I think it really just deeply engages people and really gives them an opportunity to not only explore certain areas, but just kind of take a step back and see.
Well, in the absence of that vacuum, let's say, when you're just consuming stimulus all the time, you lose like a real part of yourself.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is really funny. I heard this comedian do this bit about mindfulness. He's like, my whole life growing up was mindful. He's like, everything was mindful. He's like, go to the bathroom, mindful, right? Like, driving the car, mindful. And specifically with his going to the bathroom, he's like, I haven't taken a real shit in like 10 years, specifically because he's like, I'm on my phone. Like, I don't have this just sitting there for like 10 minutes. And there's, again, so we know that, but there's this compelling draw towards technology that we surround ourselves with. Every room has a TV in it, and you don't even need a TV, because people will be watching TV while they're on their phone, which is in their pocket or attached to them in some way, right? And you literally flip off your brain, because you can't be consuming TV and being creative at the same time, which is why, like, for instance, people go running, right? You exercise, you go running, and you solve the problems of the world. Well, you're not solving the problems of the world while you're watching TV or dealing with the problems. You have to remove yourself and flip off from consuming stimulus to just this open, freewheeling creative mode. And there's actually a very interesting term. Again, my friend Jessica D'Angelo, who does the consulting, there's a term, I believe, in Japanese culture, a culture called forest bathing. And it's literally where you go intentionally and surround yourself by nature in a non-connected manner. Literally, like, I'm going to eat this steak and I get benefit out of that. I'll eat this bowl of oatmeal. I'm going to consume this thing and I get this benefit. And you consume nature and bathe yourself in nature in a similar way, because you know it will produce a different frame of mind. It'll produce a certain response in you.
Right. Well, that was one of the things that was challenge that we had, right? Is this immersion program, as we developed it, it was like, how long do you do this, right? One, it's a fairly large commitment for somebody to take 3 weeks.
Right.
But there's also, the objective was to make it long enough so that people really feel like they get that immersion experience where they are completely removed, right? And that's where it was great advice for some of those that have done, through hiking, whether it's the PCT, whether it's the Appalachian Trail. They said it takes about 2 weeks, a little bit, before you get to the point where it's like, okay, now I'm here and this is where I am and this is what I do, right? So that's where we found that balance of 3 weeks of, okay.
Yeah, 4 days is not going to do it. You walk out on the first day, you're there, you're just getting your bearing. The second day happens, well, maybe we could do something fun. Third day, well, we're leaving.
A week becomes magical, but a week still doesn't give you that, because you it takes a couple days to detach from it. And then the next thing it's the anxiety of I'm returning and going back, right? So definitely,
Yeah, what a thing.
But no, there's some great stories on the immersion programs. And again, it's I think it's a very unique opportunity for people to that may not be able to get out there by themselves and do, a through hike or something of that sort, right? And it's very well supported. Again, you get food dropped in every week. You've got backup of a organization that can be there if something happens, whether it's fire, whether, no matter what it is. So, yeah.
What are other programs that you guys have like the immersion program? Because I mean, it's obviously like this incredibly well supported, organized thing that, again, you're pointing out, it's like you may not be able to do this on your own, but like through us, we can help you do that.
Exactly.
Are there other aspects of the Trails organization or association that are like that?
Yeah. So when we think about it, right, we drop back to our mission and go, our mission is really how do we keep trails open for all, right? And that's, the key, right? So obviously we have what we would consider just our adult trips, right? Open to anybody, anybody 18 or older. Sometimes there is youth that shows up, but if youth shows up on just an open general trip, they've got to have somebody with them as a parent or a guardian of that. And we do also a women's only trip, which is again a great experience where,
how would you know? You've never been.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard the stories, and I've only heard the stories. And as some say, it's the most fun you can have in the wilderness with your clothes on. So anyhow, with that, I would say, the women's only program has been very popular because it's very much an environment of where, we're just going to go do this, right? And we're going to make this happen. We're going to go, as individuals and as a team, and we're going to go do this. And, it's been a great, great experience for all those that have gone. Then we also, as I mentioned, we have the youth program. And then we do this immersion program, the youth program, back to that just a second, right? I mean, it was something that was, we kicked it off probably, I think it was about 4 years ago. A group out of kind of the Ketchum Sun Valley area, the Wood River Women's Alliance helped us and kind of helped fund us in that initial, hey, how can we get a youth program started? And since then, like I said, it's grown to where this year we did about 6 trips and, just the stories and see some of these youth that really step up and are truly leaders, right? And it's a year after year, you get a lot of a lot of return students. A lot of times you get, students on a trip that they may not have signed up. They may not have been wanted to be there, but
I guarantee none of them want.
There's some of them that really want to be there, and it's they show up year after year after year. But yeah, and then the immersion program, that's really more. It's open to anybody, everybody in that context. It's not really focused on any dynamic specific there, other than just get people out and get them an experience of being in an wilderness area for an extended period of time, right? So, and then we do different durations of trips as well, right? And whether it's 3 week, whether it's 1 week, whether it's a weekend, or as I mentioned, whether it's just a day helping Boise, Ridge to Rivers on some small project they have close here, they all have a very good objective and key of what we're trying to help and do, and so yeah.
I mean, like it makes me take this big breath because it's so. I have a very dear friend who has a teenage boy who's struggling, and he's struggling. He was really into a specific sport, and that's not going. I mean, anybody who's an athlete knows, like 99% of the time, it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. And that doesn't mean that you didn't invest an incredible amount of time into it. Doesn't mean it's not part of your character. Like, that's a distressing thing. It's like, okay, the world that you thought you were going to see when you woke up today, that's not the world anymore, right? And that makes you question, like, okay, what were my assumptions about the world? What is the world to me, right? It's as a lifelong athlete, I very much, I feel the pain, right? Anyway, but talking about youth and this outdoor experience, I recommended actually recently, I told my friend, I said, hey, look, I'm connecting with like a lot of fish and game guys and different people that engage in these things. Cause I bet if you get your kid out there with like really out there with people that want to help him experience this stuff and they want to teach him these things, however important the world was to him yesterday in this very specific way, it's going to be less important when he gets back.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you'll be able to be out there doing the things you're doing either through fishing game or just an immersion program. Right. There's no way you're going to come back and see the world the same way. And it's, at least in some part, a mechanism to reorient himself in the world and find a different priority set. And it's like, okay, this was actually really good. Like and again, just a small example, my own kids going on a hike that cost $0. Like we drove 10 minutes, went to this trailhead, and they valued it. It changed their value sets. And they're like, this was something different. This was something enjoyable. This is something they started asking, which I never thought in my life. Like my kids would ask to go on a hike. But it's, for youth, it's one of those things. I do a lot of work in tech safety for kids. Yeah. I work with a lot of law enforcement agencies and different things like that. And every single parent will tell you, the problem is my kids' friends are on their phones. Yeah. And if I take the phone away, then I'm taking their friends away. Right. And it's like, okay, I get that. But we've all lost friends in the past. Like as an athlete, you lose your team when you get injured. You lose your team when you can no longer do it. You lose your team when you're very engaged in high school athletics. You go on to college, you're not an athlete anymore. Like we need to develop the capacity as human beings of creating different communities or finding different communities or self-identifying, like, this is the community I want to be part of. Where's that community?
Right. These are my people.
Right. These are my people. And we're supporting these horrific technological devices that have these horrific communities on them that bring out the worst in people. But again, the answer is the only reason their friends are on that phone is because they're on the phone. Right. If they were in an immersion program, if they were out in trails, if they were out hunting, their friends would be out in the immersion program and the trails out hunting. Like your friends will be where you put them and they will find their people. Yeah. But it's having an alternate option for them that always, they're like, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to offer them. I don't know where to take them. It's like, gosh, man.
And it's funny you say that, right? Because a lot of times what we end up with in our youth programs is friends recruiting friends to come, right? It is exactly what it is. They get their friends and they're like, oh, I did this and it was so great. Come, let's go. Right. And the next thing you know, you got 4 or 5 friends doing all the trip together. Right. So, yeah,
man, it's one of those things. Like I took all the tech away from my kids last year towards the fall time, and they instantly became different people. And we were not a tech family pre-COVID. We got thrust onto the iPads. They didn't have iPads pre-COVID, but they got thrust onto them and it became part of our family. And then we realized last year, it's like, no, this is our family. Yeah. Like I don't co-parent with you and Roblox. Like I don't co-parent with you and Geometry Dash. Like this iPad is no longer the focus of our dinner conversation. Like it's over. And we were able to do that, fortunately, and engage our kids in other things. But I see people struggling with it. Right. And having outdoor access and having a robust system of like, look, these are the options. These exist. Go out and try it.
Right. Exactly. It's amazing what you'll see and how it just reframes your mind. Right. So,
man, it's wild. Listen, I know you're in the middle of a work day. What have we missed anything to talk about this time? Because I have more questions, but we'll come back to that.
Missed anything to talk about? We talked a lot about all of our different programs. I think the key is for us, and I think one of the things I wanted to touch on really is, how we do, cover the whole state, right? I think that's one of the key pieces of Idaho Trails Association. You've got a lot of different trail organizations, whether they're motorized trail organizations, whether they're non-motorized, whether they're within some state entity or not, right? But I think that's one of the things that's unique about Idaho Trails Association is we are covering the whole state. We have a great organization here in Southwest Idaho. We have a great organization in Northern Idaho and continue to grow that. And we're starting off with an organization, a presence in Eastern Idaho. This last couple of years, we've started to do a few trips over there and continue to grow that, right? So I think, when people think about Idaho Trails Association and getting involved, it can be anywhere within the state. Go explore something new. Go see some area that's new that you've never gone before, right? And as we mentioned, it's an organization that's there as a resource to help get people out, right? I mean, we're doing roughly this year, we're doing about 80 trips across the state of Idaho, and that gets about 750 volunteers out on the trail, right? And which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's amazing once you look at the hours of how many thousands of hours you actually get where people are now invested in that and giving back to not only their communities, but engaging with that resource and being out there, it really adds up quickly. So
getting 700 people to volunteer their time for anything.
Yeah.
That sound like getting 7 people would be
No,
like,
exactly,
wow, man, good for
exactly.
you. You have 7 people.
But people, and, you know, I don't have the exact number of how many of those are returning, right? But there's a large portion of them that, you know, continue to return and come back and become leaders, right? That's one of the greatest resources that we have within the Idaho Trails Association. It's just our leader pool is phenomenal, right? People that are not only willing to go out and be on a trip, but they're willing to go out and take people on a trip and spend the extra time that it takes to get the skills to be able to do that, to, you know, to learn what is it to truly lead? What do I need to have to do? You know, when you talk about that immersion program, right? I mean, it's not just the leaders that go on that, right? I mean, they're very, very talented, not only from a leadership standpoint, but from being able to make sure that, you know, everyone is safe, taken care of, and get the technical work done that's out there, right? So, so the leader.
I want to leave right now.
Yeah,
Let's go.
exactly. You have to sign up for one.
Yeah,
I'll have to
right.
get you on a trip. I think there's a couple opportunities still out there for this year. So,
Oh man, dude, I got 3. I'm not disappearing for 3 weeks. I can't leave for 3 days.
go for a weekend, or
Yeah.
you know, get on one of those trips.
Well, what
that's
I'm
a little
actually-
shorter in experience, and you know,
I'd actually be really interested in just for myself and my own family, getting my boys engaged in
Yeah.
volunteering
Yeah.
to help. Because
Yeah.
I mean, you check boxes of service, you check boxes of meaning and engagement, you check boxes in
Yeah.
of getting outdoors and you know, spending the weekend doing something
Right.
great. Like, it's not just that we're going for our own recreation. We have a goal that's designed to help other people, right? Like, and that's, you know, some people have kids volunteer in soup kitchens and stuff, but I'm always looking for ways to help them engage deeply with things that aren't just themselves, but also doing it in a venue that they'll be like, wow, look at that lizard, or like, wow, look at that snake.
Exactly. You'll be amazed what your kids get you involved in, right? I mean, and that's, you know, to get back to I think your first question you had, right? How did I get involved with Idaho Trails Association? That was it, right? My son said, I want to go do trail work somewhere. I want to go find trail work. And that's when Idaho Trails Association had just started. It was like their second year maybe, right? And, you know, and that's how we got involved with ITA, is he was seeking that, wanting to get out. Now, I will have to say he didn't get to go on the first trip, but his sister went with me, and, you know, we still had a great time. But
Dude, what an injustice. It was his idea. And he
it was
didn't
his
get,
idea.
That's like right out of my
Exactly.
childhood. I can't even hear that.
It was his idea, and
And he
there
got
was,
ditched.
You know, there were things that come up that he wasn't able to make it, but, you know, me and his sister made the best of it, and here we are, you know, 12, 13 years later, still going.
Man, that's awesome. Well, Tim, thank you for taking the time today.
Absolutely.
I really, really appreciate you talking about the different options. I really appreciate, obviously, you being part of this organization. It's so great. And again, there are things that people like me moving here just don't know are awesome in the state. Yeah. So thank you for spreading the word on it and doing what you do.
No, absolutely. And again, you know, hit the Idaho Trails Association website and go take a look, find a project, see if there's any spots still open out there this year. And if not, next year, early, kind of the March, April timeframe, that's when all the trips become available and are organized for people to sign up.
And I'm sure you guys are hurting for quality board members. So, you know,
absolutely. You know, any opportunity.
They're taking anybody these days.
Probably not anybody. No, exactly. But yeah, no, we're always looking for good leadership as any organization, right? So yeah,
I bet.
In your spare time.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.